Hello, everybody. Welcome to Strip Search, the comic strip podcast for October of 2022. I'm Pete Chianca, here with Dave London. Hiya, Dave.
Hey, Pete.
Welcome back. It feels like we were just here.
It does. It feels like, it's amazing how time goes. As they say, as you get older, time goes quicker. So
Yes. You see the light of the oncoming train, as as Bruce Springsteen has said about aging. But regardless, we are here, and it is it's sort of like convention season for all sorts of industries, but the comics and comic cartooning industries in particular. So we are sort of going to, you might consider it a theme for this month's podcast. We're going to be talking about a very special one coming to Boston. But before we do that, we wanted to mention somewhere where Pet Peeves is actually going to be a little outside of the Massachusetts borders. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I will. Thank you. So you and I and Pet Peeves will be at the in Portland, Maine, actually. So it's the Kids Con New England, which happens twice a year. Once is in Maine, once is in New Hampshire. So on October 15th, we will be in Portland, Maine at the, I'm just getting the location right, the Doubletree, Portland, Maine, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. for Kids Con New England, which is a fantastic Comic-Con devoted, as you wouldn't be shocked, for kids. So there'll be artists, conventioneers, there'll be all kinds of characters and events for kids. In fact, I'll be teaching how to write and draw a comic strip program. I know how to draw. I don't really know how to write, so I'll have to figure out that.
Yeah, I'll give you some notes to take in. I'll be manning the table when Dave is doing his presentation. But we've done this one before, and it is a lot of fun. I mean, great for families, and the costumes are great, and all the kids are dressed up, and they have all sorts of cosplayers, and not just superheroes. I remember the Ghostbusters were there last time we were there.
Those were actually the real Ghostbusters. There's a problem with the hotel.
Well, it's their Halloween, so who knows who you're going to run into. So yeah, definitely.
I was gonna say, we'll plug the website if people want to look up all the information and get tickets. It's one word, KidsConNE. So KidsConNE.com.
Yeah, check that out. Check out our site, petpeevescomic.com, where we will have a link along with this podcast to the KidsCon website and to any other information you might need to know. And if you're anywhere near Portland, Maine, we highly recommend coming out for that and seeing what it's all about.
Even if you're not near Portland, come anyways.
Yeah, get in the car and drive, for crying out loud. And shortly after that, actually, 1 week after that, to be specific, is the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, which, as you pointed out in the last podcast, Dave, makes for an interesting acronym.
Yeah. What would the acronym be? Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. MICE, I believe. MICE.
That is it. But they interestingly refer to it often as the MICE Expo. So it's sort of the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo.
So like an ATM machine?
Exactly. It bothers me a little bit. But beyond that, it's a terrific event. And we are going to be talking to Zach Clemente, who is the outreach co-director for MICE, about everything that's new. It's really, they haven't had a full-fledged MICE Expo or MIC Expo, if you want to go that route.
Want to be technically correct.
Since pre-pandemic, they had sort of an abbreviated version last year that we took part in. So he's going to tell us about the big comeback and everything else you might need to know about that particular event. So I don't want to keep people waiting. Do you have anything else you needed to discuss before we move on?
Let's get to MIC Expo.
Excellent. All right. In less than 30 seconds, we will be back with Zach Clemente of MICE. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strip Search, the comic strip podcast with me, Pete Chianca, and my co-host, Dave London. And now is the time when we introduce our special guest for this month's podcast. We have a great topic to talk about today. Zach Clemente is the mastermind behind the independent publisher Bulgilhan Press, which I just mispronounced, but hopefully not too badly. And he's also, which is most important for our purposes today, outreach co-director. for the Massachusetts Independence Comics Expo, otherwise known as MICE, which is considered New England's premier independent comics event. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and very happy to be talking about mice. It's suddenly mice season. It came upon us much quicker than we're ready for, but it's going to be great.
Well, and it's been a while since you've done a full-fledged mice event. Maybe for the uninformed, talk a little bit about what it is and its history a little bit.
Absolutely. So MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, is a free-to-attend comic arts festival held in the Boston area. Originally, it was in Cambridge. We actually are now moving to across the river to Boston and BU. But essentially, if you're more familiar with like Comic-Cons, MICE and other independent comics festivals like us are much more focused on the craft and creation and celebration of the comics themselves, which means we do a lot of programming, panels, workshops, demos all around the making of comics, the themes that come up in comics, talking about different kinds of hot topics that are going on right now within the comics community and comics making scenes, as well as the creators themselves. So a big artist alley, essentially, of about 200 creators, all selling their incredible comics and ephemera around comics as well. MICE has been around for over a decade now, so it's hard to say, like, I would say this is our 13th year, but it could be our 14th year, depending on what definition you're going by, and also maybe our 13th year running a physical festival, because we didn't run in 2020 for obvious reasons. And maybe our 12th festival, if you consider last year, we did a much smaller outdoor show, if that counts or not. So it gets a little in the weeds. We were around for a while, and it's been a wonderful experience working with MICE. I've been working with them since 2015.
Well, Dave and I were at the outdoor one last year, which was a ton of fun, and I think people were ready for just to get out and see other people. We were in one of those pockets where things weren't too bad, even though things weren't quite over yet as far as COVID. But it couldn't have gone better from our perspective, and people were clearly excited to be there. But this is going to be a much bigger undertaking. So what's new and different, and what do people need to know about what you got in store for this year's?
Certainly. I mean, the biggest thing obviously is the venue. So for the past 10 years, pardon me, in person, we've been at Lesley University in Cambridge. This year, we're moving to Boston University in the Fuller building. So we're going to be taking over the 808 Stone Gallery in the Fuller building, which is 808 Comm Ave in Boston.
Not the less full building, the Fuller building.
This is going to be pretty full. We have a feeling.
It will be fuller.
Yeah, it will be fuller. It's very exciting. One of the big things that's going to be different is in the past, we've sort of taken over Lesley's University Hall. We're sort of sprawling through a few different rooms, and it can get a little cramped and complicated. There's kind of like a conga line that goes through like 5 rooms and sort of swings back around. This year, the great majority of our table space will actually be in a contiguous gallery space, which is very interesting for us because we've never done that before. It's going to be very exciting. We will have one sort of offshoot room, which is basically on the same floor across the hallway, pardon me, very, very close to the main gallery space. And we expect that to be a much more traditional experience for a comics festival. Usually it's just a very large room with a bunch of tables. So this is what we get to do this time, finally. It's a beautiful space, which is really cool. And also it's ground level. So the outside world will be able to view in and see our wonderful little comics being sold, and hopefully that will entice people to come in. The other thing is an entirely new academic partner. Like BU is a very different beast to Lesley. They have a lot more resources and a lot of renewed interest in comics in general. And to that end, we're going to be doing a lot of awesome programming, not just during the weekend of MICE, but also some programming leading up to MICE as well. Other changes that you can sort of see are we are still doing some virtual programming. So in 2020, we did a huge host of virtual programming, all of which I produced, about 28 programs, I believe, over the course of October. This year, we're still doing a handful. All of our professional development sessions, which are usually sessions we run on Sunday morning for our exhibitors to sort of network, learn from each other, and really get into the nitty gritty. We're opening those up. So we're running them in advance of MICE, and they will be open and free for anyone to attend, which is really exciting. Otherwise, it's going to be very similar. You'll still see the yellow balloons. We'll still be handing out cheeses. The cheese might be different. We potentially secured a cheese sponsor, so we will see how that goes for us. And but yeah, it's going to be, it's basically the space. The space is the big thing. That's going to be a really interesting change. We imagine the parking will be just as bad or as good as before. And the transit is just as bad or as good as before, depending on which way you look at it. Do you prefer the green line or the red line? You know, that sort of thing.
The MBTA is in great shape now, so
Hey, you
that
know,
shouldn't
all the
be an
lines
issue
are
at all.
currently open. Well, no, actually, isn't the C line currently busted
They
right
have a
now?
couple of
I can't keep.
well, all I know is you had us at cheese.
We always
we'll,
do.
we'll get on the T for free cheese.
With respect to all the other guests who are coming to MICE, can you talk about some of the artists and other folks that people can expect to see?
Absolutely. So we're really excited about this year's lineup of guests. We haven't quite announced our exhibitors, though we are excited about them as well. What's been really fun is sort of having returnees as guests, which is really cool. So Gail Galligan is somebody we've had a bunch of times as an exhibitor, had them on programming. They were probably on one of my favorite instances of Zach Gialongo's Iron Cartoonist, and a sort of a wonderful event we normally run at MICE. And they're coming back as a guest to celebrate their new book. It's a YA like yo-yo book, which looks like a lot of fun. It's getting a lot of star reviews. And overall really exciting. We're also inviting Sarah Alfaghi back. So Sarah's first event ever was MICE because they went to school in the Boston area. They recently moved away, but we got to invite them back as a special guest, which is really cool to do. And that's been a lot of fun. We have some great local special guests. Marika Makula, who is the writer of a new comic called Slip, and we actually also invited her collaborating artist Maja Pandaya to come out as well. We have Dave Ortega, a local Latinx creator who's super amazing, did a wonderful book with Radiator Comics, who will be representing themselves as well at MICE. And Joel Christian Gill, longtime mainstay of the Boston comic scene, and actually one of the main reasons why we're at BU. He has launched a master's program at BU's Fine Arts School for the narrative sequential arts. So he sort of lassoed MICE in that process and brought us along with. So we're excited to celebrate him and his books and his work alongside everyone else at MICE. It's just going to be an amazing time. We're really excited about it. Unique situation for us. We have a guest who is only coming for Thursday programming, and that is Jarrett Krasotska, who is both on a panel on the Thursday before MICE the 20th about banned books, and is also running a workshop making comics for kids at the Brooklyn Public Library. So it's going to be a really good time. We're excited to sort of expand out MICE a little bit beyond the sort of weekend, and we're able to do that because of the guests that we have.
That's awesome. Now, in terms of sort of the target audience for people who are listening and thinking, is this for me? Is there a target audience, or is it anybody and everybody?
That's a great question. I think it's interesting because I think people have an expectation that the more independent, the more in an art scene, an event is catering towards, the more niche the audience is, and I think that's actually kind of untrue. MICE especially is pretty much open to anybody who's interested in any comic, is the idea. Like, MICE is well known for being very kid and family friendly, but that is not our explicit purpose. We sort of embrace the idea of all ages completely, but also recognizing not all work or not all programming is actually for all ages, but we do have enough for anyone of any age, of any readership level, to enjoy. I think the big success is for MICE is that we're celebrating the craft of making comics, which means we will have workshops for people who have never drawn before but really want to. We have workshops for people who are more experienced and want a more intermediate lesson or sort of approach to the work they're doing. We'll give exhibitors who have a significant amount or percentage of their work being kid-friendly a balloon so family can find them easily. But we also have cartoonists who have a lot of work which is much more challenging or much more adult in its themes. And we want to celebrate that as well. So ultimately, it's, do you like to read comics? You will find something at MICE for sure that you'll enjoy. And you'll probably find things that you didn't know you wanted to read, but are very excited to now read. Yeah, it's a really good time. Also, it's free. So it's really, it's very low barrier to come on in and check it out and see what's up.
Right. Low risk, high reward.
Yeah, low risk, high risk for your wallet, potentially, if you want for buying comics,
Right.
but also high reward because you get some excellent comics.
I mean, and I do think that's a huge selling point because there is enough going on there. I mean, you're going to leave with something because
Oh
you
yeah,
won't be able to resist. But you know, it's just a great day to just, you know, either day to go and check it out and walk around and meet really interesting artists and creators and fellow, you know, fans of the work and of the genre. And take some of these workshops and other things that are available. And I know, as somebody who has had young kids, to be able to do something, anything on a weekend sometimes just to get out of the house, is, you know, is a very valuable experience, and something like this that they're actually going to get a huge kick out of. You know, I think, you know, makes a huge difference that there's not a big admission cost, even though you'll wind up buying them a few
sure.
books.
Something I found very gratifying in its own way is that in the past we've been able to sort of exhibit at what Boston Fan Expo, it used to be Boston Comic Con, for mice, because they would run a couple months before us, and we basically get a table and sort of get to talk about mice. And inevitably, we would always have some bedraggled parents who got dragged there by their kids, who suddenly realized, like, oh, everything here, everything to do with the show costs money, and also it costs money to come here. And we talk about the show, and then like we sort of mention our guests, like, oh, I've heard of that person, I heard of that person, like, oh, is this a show coming up? It's like, oh yeah, but how much it costs? Like, oh, it's totally free to go. And they like, their jaws hit the floor. It's like, this is all free. I'm like, absolutely. And you can see them in their head penciling into the schedule, like, we're gonna go to that one because at the very least my kids get to learn something and it's free.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's so
so
funny. That's so funny. You talk about the bedraggled parents. I remember when I was a kid. Now this is going back to the Stone Ages, and I grew up in New York. And they used to have the big. You had to go to New York City for the big, you know, comic events. They were not nearly as common as they are now. And I remember, you know, I got my dad to go. Um, and you know, and you'd see the artists from Marvel Comics. It was like, you know, seeing a superstar. And it was the very beginning of the phenomenon of people dressing up. And I remember somebody was dressed up as Conan the Barbarian with the loincloth. And my father was like, what are we doing? Who are these people? What have I gotten myself into? But we did wind up enjoying it. But now it's like every weekend you could find one if you know where to look.
yeah, they've spawned up everywhere. What does make me very proud of mice is there's definitely a difference in approach and goals when it comes to mice and other similar like comic arts festivals, and what sort of become this sort of like extra tier of essential but very similar like regional comic conventions across the US. And this is something that I still find makes mice, and again, similar comic art festivals, very special in that we are very much like, there is commercialization happening. We're trying to get people to sell books. Like, one of our goals is to make sure artists sell their books and make money. But it's all in the celebration of the craft, all in, we love comics deeply. Let's talk about it. Let's share our love. Let's discuss the ways in which we work and what makes it special. And that's, I think that love and earnestness permeates throughout the show, the events, and everything that we do.
And it comes through just in your passion, just on this podcast. But something you've been talking about so far is just sort of the public face of it, what the guests see. What you haven't told us yet, which I think is the natural next question, is the behind the scenes. What goes into bringing mice together, and specifically, what do you do? How long does it take? How much time are you devoting? What is your sort of to-do list to get this thing up and running off the ground?
It's a lot. I will be extremely upfront in that, even though I've been with mice since 2015, there are still parts of it I don't fully understand, because the co-chair, the founders and co-chairs, Shelley Paroline and Dan Mazer, kind of own a lot of the relationships that mice needs to continue and persist. So for the majority of us, there's about 10 to 12 of us, depending on how you view when the staff comes in, when we start working. We brought some new people on this year, which has been really wonderful. But sort of the typical rotation is, you know, we sort of end our work in November-ish. We'll do we sort of take down mice. We do all the little like media bits. We make sure everything's updated. We make sure everything put into place where it needs to be. We sort of set things up a little bit for next year, but we can sort of go into dormancy at that point. And then we sort of start, depending on the conversations, we start conversing as early as January, February, to talk about guests. Let's take a look at what books are coming out this year. Let's take a look at what new books are coming out closer to the show, and what publishers be interested in basically having mice be one of their stops on the book tour. So therefore we don't have to, it's easier for us to bring guests in if like for payment reasons, things like that. You know, because in Massachusetts, our show runs in October, and that is also when certain grant periods start. It gets very complicated when we are applying for a grant that runs in October, but the grant is due this October, and it's a whole thing. But the majority of the work starts in spring. We'll start there, start meeting bi-weekly, and start getting things going. So this year, one of the reasons I mentioned before we started recording that we're kind of running a little behind, and we are, because when we secured the venue with BU, we were, I don't know, a couple weeks from calling it, saying like, actually, we can't run a mice this year. Or like, oh, we're going to run a small outdoor one again, because we were getting very close to the point where we could not run one because we wouldn't have enough time. So we're kind of running like a month behind in many ways. So we want to get our exhibitor guidelines up in advance of a certain amount of time. We want to get the applications open in advance of a certain amount of time. We want to make sure we have venue date. We have all this information for everyone. We want to like announce our guests at a certain point. We want to be able to book our hotel rooms at a certain point. It's a whole thing. But to more succinctly answer the question, the process starts in spring. We meet bi-weekly until about August, then we start meeting weekly. And those meetings aren't the only times we work. We work on the side. We have sort of subcommittees where some people will be more focused on the sponsorships and grant side of things. Some people will be more focused on the special guests side of things. Some people more focused on the exhibitor side of things. Other people focus on like the logistics, like let's talk to the venue, let's get tables booked, let's make sure we have AV, like start to get those balls rolling. Let's talk to like, partner organizations like Hub Comics or Millionaire Comics, or like the Brookline Booksmith, or public libraries or universities nearby, arts organizations, bookstores. Like, let's start talking about co-sponsoring events. It's like the publishers, like start opening all those channels of conversation. That all happens typically pretty early, and then just those conversations continue all the way through to the beginning of the show.
And how big is your team? It sounds like a lot of people.
About 10 to 12.
Wow, it sounded like a lot more people.
It's funny. It both feels like a lot and also not a lot, because in the past, like when I was first helping with mice was maybe like 7 or 8 people, and we've grown a bit. We've lost some, or some people have moved on. So like one of the things we did actually in 2019, I believe, was the first show where this was official. We actually formalized a nonprofit entity to produce mice. So before, mice was operated as a nonprofit, but was not legally a 501c3. We founded the Boston Comic Arts Foundation to basically produce mice as a nonprofit. And some people who worked on mice have sort of moved into BCAF as what they work for. So like grants and sponsorships have more work moved into that. We had sort of a festival producer who was basically our project manager, and he has moved into BCAF as well. So it's sort of like, okay, what kind of work were they doing? How can we fill those gaps? That's sort of why Shelly and I are like the outreach co-directors now, because we do a lot of the external facing publicity side of mice. We work with exhibitors, we work with guests, we work less on the logistics and operational side of mice, though we still do. Everyone jumps, like holds that like that boat up to some degree, but we try to delineate our focus a little more. It's a lot of work, but every time I sort of doubt, like, oh, this is a lot of work, we get to run a mice, and it's like, this is the most amazing feeling I have in the world. It's just incredible seeing the show actually flow and run, and people having a great time.
That's awesome. We are going to get back to all the nitty gritty of what people need to know before they head out to mice. While we have a couple minutes, I just wanted to ask you really quickly about what you're doing, with your independent comics press. And feel free to explain the story behind the name that I couldn't pronounce well.
Oh, sure.
And also, I love how on the site it talks about how you're specifically looking for self-indulgent comics.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Tell me real quick what that means and how you approach that.
Sure. So I decided to start a small publisher in 2018, but didn't actually start publishing until 2021. But it's called Bulgilhan Press. That's Bulgilhan. That it's a Korean word for approximately like sinister or foreboding. The reason for that is I'm half Korean and half Italian, and I'm left-handed. So in Italian, specifically Sicily, where my grandfather is from, like Sinestra, like sinister is quite literally used for people who are left-handed. I was like, that's really cool. I like being thought of as sinister. I'm not. I'm a big like teddy bear of a guy, but I like that sort of idea. And like I was looking into like, you know, traditional Korean culture, and left-handed people were also considered the same. And there was a lot of like institutional pushing people to be right-handed. I was like, okay, what's the Korean word for sinister? And it's Bulgilhan, approximately. And so I named my press that. I got a friend to design like a left hand, kind of like the sinister looking left hand. And I originally intended to be like, I want to do experimental books. And as I get more and more pitches, I'm like, actually, I think what I'm looking for is that slightly experimental can be part of this, like what I'm looking for. What I'm actually looking for is self-indulgent. I want a book that the person who has pitched it to me is the only person who can make it in this moment. Like this is the thing they are and want to do. And what that sort of turned into in a hilarious way with the last two books I published in this past year are really talented artists who are stuck in what I like to call like middle grade or YA hell. They're like stuck. I mean, because there's good money there, but like all the books they're making are a little bit more sanitized, a little bit more sanded down, less conflict, less adult themes, that you can't really explore certain topics as much as they'd like to, or as deep as they'd like to. But they have that story they really need to get out, and I'm just enough incentive to do it. So those are the last two books I published. We're very much in that line, and I hope to do more of them like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a good time so far. A friend of mine is like, a couple of friends are like, how do you feel like 1 year in? I'm like, I don't hate it, which I think is a spectacular thing. I'm genuinely enjoying it. And I'm looking forward to do more.
Why don't you give us any other plugs you want to give us for either mice or your press, or anything else that people can know about?
Sure, let's do mice. I don't know when this is going to come out, so I'm going to leave a little buffer room, but we have a few events coming up before mice. I mentioned them a little bit, but Sunday, October 6th from 4 to 7 at Hub Comics Union Square is the mice preview party. We're going to have mini grant winners and local guests available, as well as, I believe, mice themed mocktails or even cocktails. I'm not sure if we can do cocktails at Hub, but you know, we're working on it. That's gonna be a lot of fun. We traditionally have always held our kickoff party at Hub. We have decided not to hold it the night before mice because usually half or more of the organizers can't go because we're still setting up mice. So we're gonna do it the weekend before. Monday, October 17th online. This is a virtual event. We have a professional development session called Demystifying Taxes for Artists, which is genuinely going to be very helpful for a lot of artists. This is being run by Hannah Cole of Sunlight Tax. Tuesday, October 18th, we have Formatting Comics for Print with Jeff Zwerek of Print Ninja and Neil Bordeaux of Radiator Comics, who published Dave Ortega's most recent book. That's going to be very informative for people who haven't printed comics but feel like they're occasionally getting issues or don't know all the ins and outs of formatting for comics for print. So this is a great program for them. On the 20th, Thursday, the 2 days before mice, we have two wonderful events. We have at the Brooklyn Public Library, we have Making Comics with mice guest Jared Kozowska, and then at BU's Sleeper Auditorium, we have our banned books, a Cancel Culture Banned Books edition with Jerry Kraft, as well as mice guests Maya Kobabe, Jared Kozowska, and Joel Christian Gill. All those events are happening before mice. They are all free. We do recommend that you go to the mice website, micexpo.org, and go ahead and RSVP. We want to make sure we have a good understanding of how many people are showing up, just in case there is actually going to be a cap, but they are all free to attend.
That's
fantastic.
great.
And do we give the Mice Expo website? Just want to make sure. We may have, but I just want to make sure you give the Mice Expo website.
Oh yeah, I'll do it again. It's micexpo.org. Yeah, nice and easy.
And we're going to also have on our website, petpeevescomic.com/podcast, where you find all of our podcasts. We will have links to anything you need to find for mice, along with your poster and other information people might want to take a look at before they head down. Well, Zach, this was great. I'm really excited. I think it sounds like it's going to be a terrific event, and I'm so glad you guys were able to pull this together after a rough couple of years for everybody. I think people are going to be really excited to be there.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Like, part of us is very nervous that like, oh, is anyone going to show up? But I feel like we have two really good data points in our favor. One, we held mini mice last year, extremely small footprint of a show, and people were hungry for it. People showed up and were hungry for it in a way that we were not expecting. It even rained a little bit and people still showed up. And also, data metrics and website metrics be what they may. We have noticed from 2019, which is our largest show, to now, we're seeing a 35% increase in traffic to our website, people looking at the website, getting set up at the show. So that's meaningful in my mind. That's a lot of people being really excited. I'm very grateful that we have pretty much contiguous exhibitor space, because if we get a lot of people showing up, it won't be as bad as it would be and back in the old space, because that would be a very sweaty conga line of people coming through.
That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Excellent. Well, Zach, thank you so much for being with us today. And everybody, go out, get to MICE. We know a lot of you are in the Boston area. So this is a perfect way to spend your weekend, and come back next month for another new episode of Strip Search, the comic strip podcast. Thanks, everybody.